There's something about handheld consoles that just feels more personal than any other kind of gaming device. They're small enough to fit in your hands, but they carry entire worlds. For years, Anbernic has specialized in making devices that tap into our nostalgia, reminding us of Game Boys and clamshell DS consoles, of afternoons we spent hunched over pixelated screens in the backseat of a car. But with the RG477M, Anbernic is trying something different. They're not chasing the $100 nostalgia box anymore. This is a premium handheld. It's solid metal, it's polished, and it's priced to compete with the big names. Which raises a question. Does it actually feel worth it? Or is it another reminder that premium is easy to say and much harder to deliver? So let's hop in and find out. This unit here was provided to me by Lit NXT for review, but as always, these impressions are entirely my own. They're not seeing this video beforehand, and I'm here to give you my honest thoughts to what I think about it. Right off the bat, the RG477M isn't cheap. On Lit NXT's website, the standalone device is listed at $389.99 US. But the good news is there is a coupon code. ABN drops that down to $343. Lit NXT also offers bundle packages to save even more, which is a really nice touch. The bundle brings it down to $354.62. And that's before the coupon, giving you essentially a free case and some savings on top. That means realistically, most people that are interested in this are going to be spending somewhere between $340 to $360 US. And that puts the RG477M in a really unique spot. If you're interested in picking up one of these after the review, make sure to check out the link in the description below. While being far more expensive than budget retro handhelds, it's still dramatically cheaper than something like the Aya Neo or the MSI Claw. ARM vs x86. It's premium for Anbernic, but mid-range in the broader handheld market. So what do you get inside the box? The box is pretty straightforward. Of course you get the device itself. Mine came with a micro SD card, but as always I would just recommend supplying your own with your own games. You also get a USB-A to USB-C cable, a small instruction manual, and something you don't see in the box very often, a frosted silicone grip. The only other thing you get in the box is a screen protector, and I've already gone ahead and installed it on mine. Pulling the device out of the box, the impression is solid, really solid. The anodized aluminum body has a dense, premium feel to it, like a piece of carefully machined hardware rather than a toy. Kinda odd, but one thing I noticed immediately after pulling this out of the box was my left joystick wasn't seated properly. I had to push this in, then there was a loud click, and it kinda went into place. But if you look closely, you start to notice some compromises. Behind the glass, there's a small spacer around the display itself. It's subtle, but once you start noticing it, you can't unsee it. This creates a separation between the image and the surface. The kind of thing a $100 handheld can get away with, but a $350 one, less so. It's kinda hard to pick up on camera, but it sits up on the top right corner of the screen, right here. The screen protector did a little bit better of a job hiding it, but I'll attach a photo of what it looked like when I first got it. If you notice this on yours, I would reach out to the company and see if you can get a replacement. Or you can do what I did, just position the screen protector just ever so slightly up to hide that edge. In a way, that's the Anbernic lottery. For every step forward in build quality, there's a reminder that quality control can be inconsistent. In fact, when I mentioned this to Lit NXT, they specifically mentioned that they test units before shipping them out to filter out obvious defects, not specifically for review units, but for everyone. That's a nice touch and something you don't see very common in most sellers. They mention they'll be a bit more careful to check for things like this. As far as the weight goes, it feels well balanced, although the aluminum doesn't really quite dissipate heat in the way you expect it. But more on that later. Overall, the entire build quality is fantastic. But it's not flawless. It's premium in feel, but not always in finish. The joysticks themselves are Hall effect, similar to what you expect on something expensive like the Neo Pocket Ace. Smooth, precise, with the right amount of resistance. The caps themselves aren't the most grippy, but they're decent. As far as joysticks go, I prefer a little bit more grip with a concave cap. One thing Anbernic does well is D-pads. The D-pad is excellent, firm, responsive, and not much mushiness. For 2D gaming, it's probably the best input here. The triggers are just digital, but they're shallow, which feels kinda strange. They're serviceable, but not satisfying. They're also extremely clicky. I can see these being really distracting, especially if you're in a cafe or someone's beside you. There's almost a faint hollowness to these. Let's talk a little bit more about this panel. The display is where the RG477M both shines and stumbles a little bit. It's sharp, and the colors are rich, noticeably better than the previous Anbernic models that I've looked at. My unit has no dead pixels, no banding issues, and no uniformity problems. There is a small amount of vignetting on one corner, but it's pretty much unnoticeable. This is definitely a good panel, true and tested. So what about motion clarity? In motion testing, something odd happened. I was consistently getting these sync failures. This happened in both Chrome and Firefox. I'm not sure why. Not necessarily a deal breaker, but it is another reminder that these devices sometimes behave differently depending on the software stack. It's a good display, but not a great one. It kind of feels like Anbernic sourced something above average, but not quite flagship level. One thing that's also really nice is there's no light bleed. This was something that has been persistent on a few other models that I've looked at. As far as software goes, the software experience is Android with all the pros and cons. Out of the box, you'll definitely want to tinker, replace the launcher, organize your emulators, swap out that microSD card. It's a platform waiting for customization. There's also a lot of pre-installed apps that you'll want to go down and uninstall. Some of them, unfortunately, you can't because they're just default Android apps. Streaming is only going to work from YouTube. Crunchyroll videos don't load. You can hear the audio, but it only shows a black screen. This unit has no DRM whatsoever. Widevine certification definitely isn't guaranteed on these devices. This means services like Crunchyroll, Netflix, or Prime Video simply just won't work. Performance is strong for what it is. PSP and Dreamcast are essentially flawless, even with high upscaling. However, some games, like Real Fishing, won't work because you only have digital triggers. Those require analog triggers to work properly. Even systems like GameCube run really well on this handheld. Even with some high upscaling and texture packs, this system's not going to be a problem for GameCube. The benchmarks back this up, but compared to something else like the Neo Ace, the RG477M lags behind. But it edges out devices like the Retroid Pocket Flip with the Snapdragon 865. It lands right where you expect this chip. Competitive, but not class-leading. Wi-Fi speeds are pretty solid. Anywhere from about 600 to 544 megabits per second. One thing I noticed though is this handheld doesn't seem to have great Wi-Fi range. If I'm sitting in my office, which is right above the router from downstairs, I'm getting 600 megabits per second. If I go one room over to my front room, the Wi-Fi speeds drop dramatically to about 150 to 200 megabits per second. It's capable, but the experience varies. So what about the fan? Well, it has 3 distinct modes. I set this to stop for most systems like Dreamcast. Anything Dreamcast and under, you don't need to use the fan on this. If you have to use the fan, my recommendation is to set a custom profile. These other settings could be a little distracting. When you're hitting higher tier emulation, automatic has a very odd fan curve. It'll ramp up and down quite quickly. Cool also makes a bit of a whining noise, and strong is just a little distracting. For my use cases, I don't even use the fan. If you have to though, set it to custom and head into the settings. Scroll down until you see the handheld game console settings. Then select the fan configuration. At 125, it's nearly silent. At 150, it's audible, but it's still not distracting. 150 should keep it in check for most emulation. Benchmarks though do have this running a little hot. What's fascinating is how this aluminum body behaves. You expect it to conduct heat outwards, making the device warm or uncomfortable to touch. Instead, even in benchmarks, the device remains quite cool to the touch. While the internal temperatures ran pretty damn hot. In fact, this device got hotter than any other handheld that I've ever tested, in the mid-90s. While the outside temperature on this goes barely over 33 degrees. At that point, a lot of these stress tests will actually crash. So it sounds nice in the short term, cool hands, but that suggests a poor thermal transfer. The heat inside isn't leaving, it's staying trapped inside. Even the fan didn't seem to be pushing out that much hot air. It wasn't even warm, it almost seemed like it just wasn't pushing out much air at all. It doesn't really mean that it's going to cook itself overnight, but it does highlight the limits of Anbernic's thermal design. Premium on the outside, but compromised in airflow. What about the battery life on this thing? The battery is serviceable. Under light workloads like 2D emulation or streaming, you'll get about 7 hours. Push it harder with GameCube or heavy emulation and it drops to 3 or 4. That range, to me anyways, isn't really surprising, but it underscores the RG477M's identity. It's a premium handheld meant for short bursts, and not for cross-country flights. So where exactly does that leave us? At $340 to $360 the RG477M is one of the most expensive handhelds Anbernic has ever made. In many ways, it delivers a premium build, and the experience is leagues better beyond their entry-level devices. But the flaws stand out more for this price, from the odd spacer behind the screen, the inconsistent quality control issues, the DRM quirks, and the shallow triggers. Things you could easily forgive on a $120 handheld suddenly feel glaring at $350, even during these tests. Most of the benchmarks that I tried to run crashed. Ben from RH didn't have this issue on his, and he was able to get me some numbers for this. Thanks, Ben. The truth is, you can buy a Retroid Pocket Mini for about half the price, and cover most of the same ground. If you want this for retro systems, I think it's a great option, but I certainly wouldn't play anything more than PS2 on here. Even some Android games just simply don't recognize the controls. There's definitely a lot of quirks to this handheld. Believe it or not, my favorite system on this device in particular is actually Sega Genesis. It looks perfect on this screen, and the D-pad makes this one of the most comfortable experiences for this system that I've ever used. Even Game Boy Advance is nearly perfect on here. This is what I mean, it's great for retro stuff, but I wouldn't recommend it for anything modern or Android gaming. I think the shell's great, and I love the design. To me anyways, it just seems odd that they put so much power into a device aimed for retro systems. One of the other quirks that I've noticed is the speaker will randomly pop whenever you're changing whatever you're doing. The Anbernic RG477M definitely exists in that messy middle ground. For some, it's gonna be perfect. Premium enough to feel special, affordable enough not to rival a Steam Deck. But for others, including myself, it's a reminder that premium is more than aluminum. Either way, I still really like this one, and out of every Anbernic handheld that I've used, this is probably my favorite, which really says a lot. In a weird way, handhelds will always be personal, and every so often, a flawed one like this still feels like the one you'll reach for first. Do you have the RG477M, or are you thinking about buying it? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any questions, make sure to ask in the comments, and as always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.